Tom Roberts, City Councilman, District 3, joins us this morning. And Tom, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. We're two folks that are long time used to getting up this early.
That's right. That's right. And you followed a beautiful young lady, and so we just
that's tough. That's tough. I don't need any help looking bad. Following somebody that's that cute.
Yeah, I'll tell you. But Tom Roberts, who is part of our city council this morning, and I asked Tom if he would join us for a few minutes today and kind of share his thoughts. And it kind of sticks in my mind that Rocky at the work session said he was speaking for himself. He wasn't speaking for any other council members, and Tom is speaking for himself this morning, not anybody else. But Tom, your take on this 1.5 cent sales tax and borrowing the $25 million?
Well, it's a big issue. The bottom line to me is that I want a new sports complex as much as anybody. You've known me a long time. We spent a lot of time at ball games as a reporter, as a player, as a coach. I've probably been to more ball games than most anybody out there, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I see what a difference it makes to kids. And last year, when the proposal for Highway 280 came along, I was the last guy standing, the one guy who wanted to proceed with what I saw was a reasonable idea for having one. But my job as a councilman is to be a little bit on the skeptical side in something like this that requires that much money to be borrowed and raising taxes, and ask some tough questions. Make the decision deliberately. Don't get into a big rush and let emotions carry the day. We need to make such decisions for our public with more information, more questions, more answers, not less. First of all, I have to ask myself, is what we're looking at now the best location for such? And from all the complaints I've heard over the years about we need a new one, I'd have to question whether it was the right decision to put it there in the first place. But it was available through the gracious support of Avondale Mills, but they're no longer around. There are a lot of factors that play into it. It's not a great neighborhood. We have found since that meeting the other night that closing the road and adding another road and shutting off Twin Street is not as cut and dried as it may seem.
That's a big chunk right there.
Oh, that's a big chunk. And you also have to consider the fact that the property between the sports complex and Highway 21 is owned by an entity that we don't exactly have a great relationship with. It's the folks at Reef. They own that property. And I don't know, got left out of the loop on a lot of this stuff. I don't know how gracious they're going to be. That could be a long and expensive prospect.
What do you mean you were left out of the loop?
Well, there were a lot of meetings on it, but there were, a couple of councilmen, a couple of members of the rec board, and that's I was getting most of the information I had on it the same place everybody else was during that meeting the other day.
Okay.
So can we really afford to borrow $25 million? Well, I keep going back, and I've replayed this conversation and the look on a certain person's face so many times since that day, and it was months ago. But our city clerk / city treasurer, who is the chief accountant for all of our city funds, looked at me across the table with a concerned look on her face and says, "Please don't borrow a lot of money." That meant a lot. That meant a lot. And the reality of it is I understood immediately because I've had to become a little more intimately involved in the process. We have a dwindling reserve. We haven't added to it in our entire term. We're good at spending it, but we're not good at creating it. We as a city do not have a capital spending plan. That means that we're not every month or every year taking X amount of dollars and putting it aside for specific purposes, much like re-roofing your house, that sort of thing. We have growing infrastructure needs, and if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. The traffic lights that went out. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and there are more on the way. We have to address those things. Our roads, and part of this money is for addressing our roads. So those are some of the things we have to think about. And somebody pointed out to me with a Facebook message, as a family on a tight budget with little or no money in savings, do you go out and finance a swimming pool when your roof and your heating and air system are 20 years old and been giving you problems?
And that's a great point.
I mean, that's something we have to think about. And, you know, I'm not trying to be negative toward this, but these are things we have to consider. Can raising the tax rate 50% actually produce 50% more revenue? I know it wasn't my favorite subject back in school, but microeconomics says it can't. And there's a specific reason behind that. Microeconomics is, to boil it down, is the science or study of people and businesses and how they act and react to changes, rises and falls in the amount of spendable money they have, their income, and the decisions that they make according to that. And that's something that we have to look at is, yes, I've heard a number of people tell me, as you can tell, I'm taking this seriously. I've taken a lot of notes. I probably filled up 3 of these pads and burned up half my computer memory just putting my thoughts down. We have to take into consideration those people who say, I don't mind paying extra money for a sports complex. But we also have to keep in mind those people who don't want to, and especially those who can't. Because you were asking me about, right before we came on the air, about how much a city councilman makes and the effect that being on the council has had on my income. And I have to consider myself to be on an extremely tight budget with my family. And that can be a burden, because when you're on a fixed income, severe fixed income, for example, on disability, the average disability check is $1,166 a month. For a family of 4, that amounts to $235 each. That's basically taking 1 month's income away from them that they can't spend on something else. You can't just shift money around to spend money the same way you were going to. What about people who don't live inside the city that come in here to spend? We change the dynamics of that, and suddenly these people have a decision to make. I shopped in Sylacauga because I could get my prescriptions for less money in Sylacauga. Well, I can't anymore. Why don't we go someplace else and find that some other place may have better selection, a bigger variety? Those are the kind of things that we have to consider, and microeconomics does consider those things. And it says, along with a long history of cities and counties all across the state of Alabama and across the country, where they thought they were going to get X number of dollars when they didn't get half that. Some of them went down. The state of Illinois, it's really a comedy of errors. At least every other year since 2005, the state of Illinois, one of their major counties or cities, has raised or lowered their tax rates, and the results they got are not what the typical person thinks. They raised the rates, the income went down. They lowered their rates, the income came up because people change their spending habits depending on the taxation issue.
Tom Roberts, District 3 City Councilman in Sylacauga, and you know, this is not a public vote as far as the citizens are concerned. It is the City Council who makes this decision. And how would you address, Tom, the timing of this? It's political season, election coming up in August.
Well, the timing of it, and I've fielded a lot of comments and questions about, are you running for re-election? To be honest with you, Jimmy Dale, I haven't really had time to think about that much. It has had a profound impact on my life and my family life and my business life, but you can't even qualify to run until July the 5th. There's plenty of time for that, and I don't want to make tough decisions that I knew were coming like this with that hanging over me, re-election hanging over me. So, you know, one minute I lean toward running for re-election, and I guarantee you there's some moments where I run toward running for the city limits. It's a tough job, and I take it seriously. A lot of people call me, a lot of people text me, message me on Facebook, but even more people, I'm a public person like you are, people want to grab you and talk about things, especially when you're on the city council. So I have to question that. And also, last time we built the sports complex, we settled for something that was less than ideal because the property was available. That's another question that's been posed to me. Are we settling again for less than what we want, less than what we need? And to be honest with you, it's settling for a ship because of the ship that sailed out on Highway 280, that one came with an awful lot of pluses, including a lower cost, some economic development and marketing advantages for that location over any other location. And one of the things you hear from citizens is we want more for our kids to do, and a sports complex would certainly do that for a portion of the kids that are athletically minded. But a place like that, if we market it like Coleman did, that's been thrown at us as an example of why and how we need to do it, but they put together a marketing and economic development package years before they actually built it. They bring a lot of teams in, and that meant that out in the middle of nowhere where they built it, Jimmy Dale, there's a lot out there now. It's busy, it's bustling, and what they drew in there are some of the same things I hear every day we want for our kids, for ourselves. Movie theater, bowling alleys, skating rink, laser tag, paintball, rock climbing, zip lines, those kind of things. They're easier to attract into a community like Sylacauga when they're somewhat in relation to a sports complex that's bringing in hundreds of teams and thousands of people every week.
What about the road coming in proposed off of 21?
Well, the biggest concern I have, besides the cost, and it comes with a big question mark on the cost because of what I said before, Reef. They own the property. We sued them. We caused a lot of grief for them. They caused a lot of grief. I wouldn't think so. And I do not know if there have been any conversations with them, but the bulk of the property, of all the different ways and places we could go, no matter where we come out, and no, I do know it's not through Taylor Estates, but that aside, the property just on the north side of Taylor Estates, it's all owned by Reef. That's a huge question. And another question I have is, what is going to change by shutting off Twin Street? The Mill Village, which I know is near and dear to your heart, we had a lot of ball games over there with pickup games and a lot of great families and friends. It was once a great neighborhood, but it's not anymore. Is closing a road going to change that, or is it going to put it more out of sight, out of mind? And when things are out of sight, out of mind, they get very little attention.
What does it say proposing to close that into Twin Street there?
Well, it shows some concern for the safety of our children and for make it a more attractive place for people to want to go. But it's still, I couldn't help it. I chuckled a little bit when somebody said, "What's that down there in the left corner?" And I said, "That's Reef, the plant." It was a industrial waste treatment facility. It's still there. It's still operable. EPA and ADM came in, spent millions of dollars cleaning it up, but it's still there. And they said, EPA and ADM says there's not a lot we could do power-wise to keep somebody, including Reef or anybody they sell it to, from coming back and doing it again. We, thanks to Ron Johnson, we have some more restrictions in place that lower the chances of that happening, but it's still there. It's still a dangerous neighborhood, and as far as I know, well, there have been numerous reports of gunshots going off in that area over the years. Bullets aren't subject to road closings. They don't stop and listen to that. So those are some concerns that have been expressed to me and that I have actually. And I just have to stop, and we have to make some tough decisions with a lot of information. That's, like I said, I hate sounding negative, but we have to consider a lot of different things. And
do you feel that the next council meeting, the 19th, I think it is that a day where you guys will be making a decision on this property?
I got the impression from the meeting last Thursday that that's Rocky's intention, and if I'm forced to have to vote, then I'll be forced to vote then. But I think this is something we need to take a bit more time on and get a few more answers. Let me put it this way. A wonderful young lady came to the city council months and months ago. In fact, she's come several times, wanting to get control of a piece of...
Hold that right there. Can you hang out with me about 5 more minutes
sure,
or so? We're going to get to the top of the hour, and we'll come back with Tom. And I want to ask you about the proposed $5 million that's going, $4 to $5 million that's going for road resurfacing in the city. So we want to talk about that. Final half hour of Daybreak. City Councilman Tom Roberts, District 3, hanging out with us a few more minutes. And you were right in the middle of something I want to get back to.
Okay, a young lady came to the City Council with a really neat idea about a garden program and in the Walco area. And although it was a neat idea, we sent her home to come up with a business plan, a detailed business plan, so that we could properly gauge whether she had it going well enough to actually make it happen, convincing us to let her use the property because this was a good idea that was workable. And we have sent her back 3 or 4 times to come up with a detailed business plan so we can properly gauge if this is viable. How can we hold ourselves to lesser standards? That, to me, is important. We need more information. Well, what are we going to get for our $15 million, and is that a realistic budget? Those are questions that I don't have the answer to right now. And before I'm willing to vote yes on borrowing that kind of money and raising that much, trying to raise that much money through taxation, I have to know those answers. I have to know a little bit more, a lot more actually. We have to have detailed plans. Somebody on Facebook says, well, I'd like to see a cost analysis. Absolutely, this is part of the process.
1.5% proposed tax increase. It's now 8%, and it would go to 9.25% if this develops. And the city, according to Rocky Lucas, his proposal borrowing $25 million, and $5 million of that supposedly going to be spent on roads. And I'm not a real rocket scientist, but I've been told that the roads are so costly. I don't know how much $5 million will take care of.
Well, actually, it'll take care of a good bit of it. We got a not a proposal, but an evaluation of our roads and the costing of, basic costing of what it would cost to repair the worst ones, or some that aren't so bad yet but will be if we don't address them now. Those sorts of things. And that's
the top thing I hear is the roads.
Oh, absolutely. And to be very bluntly honest with you, I would vote right now to borrow the money for roads because of a couple of factors. Number one, Jimmy, when you have a bond issue that's less than $10 million, there's tax advantages in it for the banks, who are the most likely people to buy the municipal bonds, because not only are they tax-free, but they also come with some tax credit incentives that bond issues $10 million and over don't provide. So it makes it a lot more attractive to go ahead and borrow the lesser amount of money. And there are places that I have identified in our current budget that we can afford to tighten our belt a little bit and cover that, because it should be a priority. And it goes back to what I was talking about before. Having a capital spending plan and routinely setting money back to cover those things that we know or should know are on the horizon. And roads are one of them.
$5 million on other city projects, the proposal too, including a new indoor swimming pool. Is that something that's been talked about previously?
Well, actually, to be very honest with you, I brought it up years ago when we were building the one that we built. That's because there are Americans with Disabilities Act funding available that cannot be cut. The Supreme Court said so, that would help provide funding for building it, maintaining it, and constructing it, rather than borrowing the money. The dynamics have changed since the 80s when we built the pool about that grant program. It still exists, but doggone, they're getting good at hiding where you have to go to get the money. And those who get it, like the place that I found out about it from, I was a volunteer at a place in Montgomery over by Huntingdon College, where I was a student and later a coach, that was called the Therapeutic Recreation Center. It was basically a YMCA for the elderly, the handicapped, the retarded. I worked with stroke victims. Because of my former boss, former Mayor Curtis Lyles, after his stroke, and it made me want to make a difference in that thing. But Carol Johnson, who at the time, she's passed away now, she was the director there, and she helped me gather the information to bring back to Sylacauga, and it fell on deaf ears. But I know it's still out there, but we just have to find where to apply to get that funding, because we have a large population of those people I was talking about, the handicapped, the retarded, the elderly, and enough to qualify for the funds, but not so much that we couldn't use it for all the other.
Would it be built at the same location?
Well, they didn't have anything on the map about where to put it. Okay. They didn't say it was stopping one of the other ones, or stopping the one we have now to rebuild, or well, that's another factor with the location for the sports complex. They're going to renovate the fields and put in a new concession stand, bathroom building in the center of it. Where are we going to play in the meantime? That sort of thing. So that was sort of one of those things that got thrown in, oh, by the way, moments, because they know it's an emotional thing that draws people in.
And knowing how dear to your heart that Little League sports is, Little League baseball, and Cal Ripken, you got these entities here.
I was so excited when Steve Masters texted me and asked me if I'd throw out the first pitch that I didn't even bother to stop and ask, is this somebody, his name wasn't in my caller ID. I didn't even stop and ask, is this Little League baseball, Little League softball, Cal Ripken baseball? I just said yes, because it excites me. I love watching the kids play.
Now, I was posed a question yesterday, and I'll pose it to you this morning. If this project goes through, and there's talking about several different fields there, Does that mean bringing Little League to that complex, or is that going to continue to be a separate entity? Because there's concern about that, because Little League is a different entity than Cal Ripken.
Absolutely, with different, you know, there are a lot of different things. I won't get into a tit for tat type thing, but I grew up on Little League. Right. I started broadcasting when I was still a kid at Little League games. I've gone to St. Petersburg, Florida so many times, they know me by name down there. There have been discussions about somehow trying to come together, but it always came down to, well, y'all quit and just come play over here. And I'm not sure that's palatable. So I don't know. That's another one of those good questions that we don't have an answer for, but it would be a shame to have these wonderful new fields for one group and not support the other.
Yeah. Tom Roberts, Councilman District 3, our guest this morning, and Tom has been sharing his thoughts on the proposal to borrow $25 million and raise the sales tax 1.5%. And according to Lucas, his numbers indicate that we will be paying, I think, about $1.5 million a year as a payment to rebuild, as the payment on the loan. But he said the sales tax increase should bring in about $3 million.
Okay, let's go back to the bond payment. In a presentation that Walter Lewis from Piper Jaffray, who has the G17 with the city, which means we can share information to get proposals. His proposal on borrowing $25 million was about $1.85 million a year payment. Another that I asked said it was more toward 1.5. That's a lot of money. That's about $5,000 of debt for every single family in Sylacauga. That's a lot of debt. Now, as far as the $3 million raised by the taxes, microeconomics says that it can't, but let's just for a moment suggest that it can and it will. And it's part of the explanation about why it can't. If you take $3 million, a penny and a half is a small amount of money, then how does $3 million become so large? It adds up. It adds up quickly. And you take $3 million out of our economy because it can't buy any goods or any services because it's going to taxes. $3 million a year, that's greater than the payroll of a lot of our small industries in Sylacauga. And the effects of taking $3 million out of our economy is pretty much the same thing as closing down one of those industries. And if you listen to the public, which you and I often have to do, they want more and better paying industry, not less. Yeah. And it has the same effect because you're taking money that can't be spent on goods and services. It's earmarked. It's coming out. It's tax money. And you take that out of that, where are we going to make up the extra $3 million for our small businesses, or heck, even our big businesses? They will be making decisions based on the change in dynamics. Grocery stores and places like that, places like Walmart, they don't have a huge margin. They depend on volume. Well, what if you mess with that volume? They have to make decisions, and their decisions are independent of what we do or what we want, and we have to live with those. And they make decisions. We have less places to shop as a possibility. It's even a possibility because it happens routinely around the country where people raise the tax rates and not only don't get that equal amount of money, 50% increase, 50% of revenues. There's some places, a lot of them in fact, that revenues went down.
Yeah. Even though the City Council will make the ultimate decision, there are a number of players in this, including the Talladega County Commission. I'm not asking you to speak for the Council President or for Greg, who is our representative for this district of the County Commission, but they're going to be a player in this.
Absolutely, because they have to help decide if we can close Twin Street, and that's a different dynamic.
You've talked to both parties, however.
I have, and it's not This is not a cut and dried, do we want a sports complex issue. It's a lot more complex than that. And I got to thinking about it this morning. We've wanted a new sports complex for a long, long, long time, but we've never gotten one. Right. People will point at, well, the city councilman didn't just go ahead and do it. Well, the real reason that we wanted but never got one is that, in my mind, with so many councilmen and mayors over the years, has there ever been a proper workable plan to build one, to operate one, to maintain one, and to market one? I don't think that the key in building a sports complex needs to be borrow and spend and tax. It needs to be growth. Those things that we want, they're a part of paying for it. They're a part of growing our economy to bring in the types of businesses that, without visitors coming regularly for tournament play. When we built the Donald Comer Jr. Sports Complex, I was playing on two separate, well, they were a lot of the same people, but one church league and one independent league softball team. And I was excited that, hey, we're finally going to get to play some tournaments here. Well, it didn't happen. We spent our weekends going to Rainbow City, Atala, and Gadsden, up to Etowah County, because that's where the tournaments were.
Spending money there.
Spending money there. And that's disappointing, because we didn't have people that are specifically in charge of recruiting. Have we even talked with the travel sports organizations and find out what it is they look for in wanting to come? Yeah. Well, I have. As part of the 280 proposal, several of them came to us, came to me, and I listened to them. And those factors are important in paying for it. It makes long-term debt a lot more palatable when you have specific things besides just a tax increase. If you increase business, Scott Hamlet, he's my conscience. He stays on me all the time, and I love it because he keeps me pointed. And he came back yesterday and quoted me in a previous conversation that we had had, and it was about.
Don't you just hate those sometimes?
No, I don't mind. I really don't mind. Because that's part of the process of listening and learning. And he reminded me again that I said raising business is a key to raising revenue, not raising taxes, because raising taxes can dwindle the business pool. And we got a small one. We got too many empty buildings already. A lot of positive things going on that front, and one by one, things are looking up, but we don't need to change that, Jim.
Tom Roberts, our guest this morning. Tom, Councilman District 3, appreciate you being with us this morning. And next time, one of these days, if see how this flows. If it doesn't flow, we've got to have another plan somewhere, so we might talk about that soon.
Sure.
Tom Roberts, Councilman District 3, our guest. More coming up on Daybreak right after this.